Hi, I'm Femi OK, and join the stream. Today, political crisis in Ethiopia. A state of emergency has been declared after the sudden resignation of the Prime Minister. We ask, what's next?
I'm Malika Bilal. If you're joining us live on YouTube, send us your questions and your comments, and I'll do my best to get them into today's show.
In a hectic few days last week, Ethiopia was thrown into political crisis. It began on Wednesday with the release of several high-profile political prisoners, including opposition leaders and journalists, in what observers saw as a concession to a street protest movement that has swept the country over the last 3 years. The following day, Prime Minister Haile Mariam Desalegn suddenly resigned in what many saw as a further concession. But then on Friday, a state of emergency was declared, confusing the picture and leaving many Ethiopians wondering what is going to come next.
So joining us to discuss these issues, Alula Solomon is the director of the Union of Tigrayans in North America, a civic organization that works for the advancement of peace, democracy, and constitutional rule in Ethiopia. Jawar Mohammed is the executive director of the Oromia Media Network.
Sadele Lema is editor-in-chief of Addis Standard, and Mohammed Adal, senior correspondent for Al Jazeera, and he's worked extensively in Ethiopia. We also invited several representatives of the government in Addis Ababa to take part in the show, but they didn't respond to our requests. So if you go on aljazeera.com, you look up Ethiopia, so many questions being asked back here. Ethiopia's state of emergency 2.0, Ethiopia bans protests in 6-month state of emergency. What triggered unrest in Ethiopia? The questions go on and on and on. Every headline is a question. Mohammed, if we go back a week and we look at a state of emergency, Prime Minister stepping down, what does that mean in this big story that you've been telling us over so long?
Yes, indeed, Femi. What happened last Thursday is something that was a surprise to many. But again, many were not surprised that Haile Mariam was gone, although the timing was a bit of a shock to some. Haile Mariam Desalegn was a man who was largely seen as a placeholder. He took power after the death of Prime Minister Meles Zenawi, who was the architect of Ethiopia's recent economic boom. He is from the south, comes from the smallest party within the ruling coalition, which is made up of 4 parties. He is a Protestant in a country that is whose population is mainly made up of Orthodox Christians. So in many ways he was an outsider, and people expected before the elections in 2020 he was going to go. But after the government threw so many concessions to those people who've been protesting since 2015, it became quite apparent, and also following so many blames that were put on the Prime Minister, that he was being lenient and he was not offering leadership at a time of crisis, he was then made to step aside. What many of our sources in Ethiopia are saying now is that the military, where real power in Ethiopia rests in, trying to use the process of finding a successor to Haile Mariam Desalegn to appease even more protesters and probably come up with something of some kind of a solution to the crisis the country is facing right now.
You know, Mohammed Edo, you spoke the words, and they're already on Twitter because people are saying the exact same thing. This is one person who tweeted in, he merely served as a placeholder in the Prime Minister's office. He knowingly accepted his obedient role for over 5 years, and this is why he meekly accepted the arrangement and resigned. It was a drama orchestrated by his quote-unquote masters. This is what one person says. Another person, Raymak on Twitter, says he was just a symbolic Prime Minister to appease the Ethiopian people. He didn't have the decision-making powers of his predecessor. The power is in the hands of the ruling political bureau and the coalition that is led by the Tigrayan majority party runs the show from behind the scenes. Alula, when you look at this second tweet here, that the power is actually behind the scenes and that he was a placeholder, what do you make of that commentary?
Well, I don't agree with that actually statement, because Ethiopia has been led by the EPRDF, which is made up of 4 member parties from Oromo, Tigray, Amhara, and the southern people. So after Prime Minister Meles' departure, Haile Mariam came to power, and then he's been serving his country based on the party's consensus, and then based on the constitution of the country.
We have Jawar on the phone. Jawar, I want to play a little bit what will be audio for you, but video for the rest of us. Some high-profile prisoners who were released last week. Have a listen.
You know, this country is a country of 100 million. It is too big for one political group, you know, for one group, small group to run the affairs of 100 million people.
Ethiopia is one large prison. I say this because there is no democracy in the country. This is a dictatorship. We have to change this big prison into a democratic state.
Jawar, could the ruling party be changing? They've released prisoners, they've released journalists. Could this be the road to more democracy in Ethiopia? Or democracy in Ethiopia?
That was the hope we were getting about last week when they started changing releasing political prisoners and liberalizing the political space. But right when you're taking positive development on part of the government, then they impose the state of emergency. So on one hand, they give hope; on the other hand, they take it away. So the ruling party has a difficulty. It's rooted in its ideology where they believe one party and one group of elites has to dominate. That cannot work. As Dr. Mura said, in a country of 100 million and some 80 ethnic groups, you cannot have a single party dominate every aspect of life, economy, military, and security, and expect peace, expect to rule forever. They have to change. They have to remove the state of emergency. They have to open up the political space to competition among various interest groups. But the current state of emergency dashes the hope for change through negotiation.
So, Jawar, someone who might agree with you, Adnaf on Twitter, says the only way to overcome the crisis in Ethiopia is widening the political sphere and making all political groups in and outside of Ethiopia part of that solution. Sadly, by declaring a state of emergency, the ruling party showed us it isn't ready for real political dialogue. But we also got someone who then would disagree with both you, Jawar, and that person who tweeted. This is Daniel Bahrani. He's the founder of Horn Affairs in Addis Ababa, and this is what he told the stream.
Regarding the question whether the announcement, the decree of the state of emergency would exacerbate the unrest or not, I don't see why that would be the case. All other things constant, provided all other things are managed well, the state of emergency should enhance the security and the stability in the country, not the other way around. Secondly, at any rate, the situation would, at any rate, I would expect the situation in the country to be better with this state of emergency than without it.
So Sidele, he says this should enhance the security of the country. Is that what we're seeing right now? What's your view of that?
Well, I respectfully disagree with Daniel with this regard, because as much as I would like to believe that the intervention from the security could play a role in calming a community, a country of 100 million who have just been told that their prime minister is resigning out of the blue, and who have been left disoriented with a sense of a regime collapse. As much as I would like to believe that the security could be playing a role in calming this, the structure of our security is it's made in such a way that its brutality is considered to be a calming factor. We have seen that over and over again, not only in the last 3 years, but since the establishment of the current government, there is no, the security has been functioning with impunity and have a track record of brutality. Ethiopians know that. Even a small gathering of protesters could turn into unimaginable bloodshed because the security cannot restrain itself. Now, under the state of emergency, the security has just been given a blanket permission to search, to stop, and to do what's included in the state of emergency. And suddenly we expect it to restrain itself I highly doubt that, and it's not its track record. So I respectfully disagree with Daniel.
Well, actually, generally speaking, the country has been through in crisis since 2015. I believe there are three major factors that actually contributed to this crisis in the country, which led to political malaise in the country right now. The first one is there is lack of consensus between political actors in Ethiopia, major political actors. For example, we can take in nation building. Some of them are pro-federalism, which is right now currently employed in Ethiopia. And some other actors are nostalgic of the previous regime, which was in Ethiopia before 1991. And on the other hand, we do not even agree on the status of the capital city. I believe Jawar and Zadala know this issue. So the second factor is we have made a political transition since 1991, but the government failed to uphold those promises after the 1991 political transition to open up democratic space, inclusive of all political actors. And the third one, I believe, is the crisis within the ruling party, EPRDF. So this led us to this political malaise we are in right now.
Several years of protests. So, Jawar, I'm just thinking here, one of the things that the state of emergency has actually done is stop the protests, or at least try to stop the protests. What are you hearing from the Oromo perspective about the impact of this state of emergency?
It has absolutely no impact whatsoever, because the state of emergency did not stop. Last year it lasted for 9 months. Right towards the end of the state of emergency, the protest erupted. Now, after almost 2 hours after it was declared the state of emergency, where nowhere to be seen, people have continued to ignore it. The government does not have the capability, the legitimacy, even the military muscle to control the region. The regional bureaucracies, the regional security forces, the police are not with the central government. The central government cannot implement this state of emergency. It is meant as a tactic to intimidate people into staying inside, into submitting, but that's not working. And I don't understand why they needed a state of emergency. There is no violent confrontation. It is a non-violent protest. It's a non-violent movement that did not threaten security.
Actually, in crisis, there was unrest, people were killed, and then there was displacement of people. And so people were targeted because of their ethnic background, their properties destroyed and ransacked. So all these factors, actually, I know that. I agree the state of emergency has its own cost, but it's not as expensive as lack of peace. So the state of emergency actually can help the government or the ruling party, EPRDF, to accomplish its promises when the executive party, the executive committee of the ruling party has been taking its meeting, which lasted for 17 days. So it helps the ruling party and the government to do all the decisions that was made during the meeting. So I believe the state of emergency can help implementing those promises.
Yeah. I take your point, but I want you to hear this one. Consider this perspective. This is Tawadros, and he sent us a video comment.
Amaras have felt the brunt of this regime for 27 years and are fighting for survival. Amaras have been ethnically cleansed from their land, seen their population dwindle, and live as second-class citizens in their own country. Instead of opening up dialogue and opening up the political space, the TPLF regime has declared a state of emergency again. The state of emergency needs to end immediately. The solution to Ethiopia can only come when all Ethiopians are part of the conversation on how to create a democratic Ethiopia.
So, Sadele, we've seen strikes in a couple of Amara cities. What is it that protesters want?
Well, it depends on where the protesters flare up. The Ethiopian people do have piles and piles of questions that have been relegated to the back. at the expense of or to indulge the politics in there. So it depends on which area the protests flare up. So the Oromo people do have their own questions, and the Amhara do have the same. Their own question, and if you go to the southern region, the Konso people do have their own questions. So this is a accumulated result of the question of the people that have not been addressed by the ruling party for the last 27 years. It's just layers upon layers of grievances from maladministration to the questions of identity to the questions of self-administration, which is enshrined in the Constitution, but which has been trespassed by the central government over and over again. So it's a multitude of questions that are flaring up everywhere you go, and the people have had it enough. That's why they're coming up to the streets with the questions, and the questions keep on growing.
So, Dele, we found it as...
If I may
yes,
jump in
Jawar.
here.
Yeah, please go ahead, Jawar.
I think whether it's in Amhara region, Oromia, or any other region, the people's demands are very simple. They want an end to discrimination. They want an inclusive politics. They want democracy. They want a good governance. But this government, since this party, under a domination of a group that comes from 6% of the population, has monopolized political power, economy, security. They have been jailing and exiling elites, the educated sector from other ethnic groups. People want to be part of the process. They want to have part of the pie, but the regime is not willing to do that. And as long as the regime continues to aspire to maintain its dominance and hegemony, there will be protest. But now, I want to add this. Now where we are, the regime can no longer maintain domination. The regime is at its last leg. It's really right now what the people are trying to do is save the country by getting rid of the regime.
Yeah, I agree. The demand from the public has to be listened by the government and has to be answered. But the problem here is people who live in the Western countries, like who have the media, are fanfaring the violence in Ethiopia right now. They're actually propagating information that can instigate ethnic violence, clash between people. We have.
But Alula, listen. I run a television from Minnesota because I cannot run it from Ethiopia. There is no independent media. The journalists who got just released.
I agree, Jawar, with your idea. We need to have inclusive politics. I know that. There has to be kind of...
Alula, let me just add something, because I know you're not seeing it, but I have a monitor, so I see Sedele and I see Mohammed actually smiling when we're talking about independent media in Ethiopia. So I think there's a knowledge there. They're acknowledging that there isn't.
EPRDF has made a decision during its executive committee meeting, which lasted for 17 days, and prisoners are released right now, political prisoners. And then actually one of the 4 member parties has a decision during its executive parties to participate in this open political process. I believe Jawar knows this. Yeah. The OPDO, which is one of the member parties of the EPRDF, has called. Yeah, so the regime is now starting to open up the space. It released political prisoners. It promised
okay, so let me just say, just we're running out of time in this show, Leah. Let me just show people what you're thinking here. On your Twitter feed, over 730 prisoners have been pardoned by Ethiopian authorities as part of a political reform move to foster national unity. We hear your perspective. Let me just show you something behind me here. You've been watching it during the whole of the show. This is supporters of the Secretary General of the Oromo Federation Congress, and they're in Adama. This is the Oromo region, and this is the area, the community here celebrating his release. But Mohammed, I want to play a little clip from you from a stream episode in November 2016, and this is Getachew Reda, and he was at the time the communications minister for the Ethiopian ruling party, and this is what he said about what do we do now, and that was almost 2 years ago. Have a listen.
There has to be dialogue. By the way, this is a matter of survival. We cannot afford to hack our way out of impasse after impasse. If we fail to address the grievances of the public in a manner that satisfies
Are you succeeding right now,
if
Minister?
we fail to create mechanisms whereby people can vent their frustrations in a manner that doesn't affect the stability of the country, and then the survival of the country itself will be at stake.
Again, it was protests that brought us to that show, protests that were shut down last week. How much progress has Ethiopia made? Mohammed?
Well, you can say that a lot has happened in terms of progress in Ethiopia, and particularly in the development field as well as the economy. Ethiopia is one of the growing economies in Africa. Just a few months ago, it became the biggest economy in East Africa. But when it comes to the issue of basic freedoms, freedom of speech, freedom of the media, and this is a huge problem in Ethiopia. And the government has been, as it has done before, trying to use the same tactics it has used over the years. And in this era of social media, it's quite untenable to be able to use all these tactics that have worked for you in the past but might not work for you at the moment. But one thing that my friends have not yet raised, and which I think is the elephant in the room, is the issue of ethnic federalism. That decision taken way back nearly 30 years ago, when Ethiopia was divided into ethnic-based regional states, and which has resulted in today people paying more allegiance to their ethnic community first than to the state and the nation of Ethiopia and the federal flag, because every region out of the 9 has got its own flag and its own identity, using its own language, not only in schools but also to govern themselves. That, I think, has really chopped Ethiopia small and is at the epicenter of the problem that is unraveling in Ethiopia.
So, Mohammed, I'm glad that you brought it up, because actually several people on Twitter are discussing that very issue and want to know if that's going to change. One person says, if I could reshape Ethiopia, I'd abolish ethnic identification. It gives me World War II shivers, to be quite honest. Integrate Ethiopia, leave religious sectarianism and ethnocentrism behind by strengthening internal cohesion of the people with the political system at any cost. On the other hand, though, the opposite view, Bedelo says, I strongly believe the system of federalism is the best panacea to our multi-ethnic nation. Sadele, you can see there is a divide online on whether or not that is the answer or whether or not it should be discontinued. What do you make of that?
Well, this is a very complicated matter to address it in a very short platform like this. To begin with, there is no such thing as ethnic federalism. The Constitution does not say that. Ethiopia is a federation, and it's a country of more than 80 ethnicity groups. So, by definition, it calls itself a federation, and its ethnic arrangement is called multi-ethnic federalism. So I'm not saying that there is not a problem in that arrangement, but most of the problem emanates from in a country where you have an 80 ethnicity groups, the majority of them being the Oromo and being one of the most marginalized ones. To run a system whereby you have the economy, the security, and other basic pillars of a functioning country controlled by a minority does not bode well. It doesn't bode well even in a democratic country, and Ethiopia is just practicing that kind of bold decision that they took in 1991, but it has not been tested. None of the provisions that are included in the Constitution have been properly implemented so far. So it is a constitution that tries to acknowledge that the country is a multi-ethnic country. It is not a country that's dominated by one language, one flag, one ethnicity like it used to be before. Okay. It tries to address that, but the politics got in the way of it. Sure. And the politics botched it. So we have not even tried to apply that ethnic federalism as bold a decision as it was to have been taken in 91.
Jawar Mohammed, Alula Solomon, and Mohammed Adal, our time has it's run out. We're at the end of the show. We're all online, #AJStreams, where we will continue this conversation. Luke and I will see you there. Thanks for watching.
ሰላም አለይኩም ወራህመቱላሂ ወበረካቱ። ሰላም ጤና ይስጥልኝ የተወዳችሁና የተከበራችሁ አድማጮች፣ ለነበረው የድምጽ ችግር ይቅርታ ጠይቃለሁ። ድምጹ ራሱ ከፍ ይላል፣ ዝቅ ይላል። ዝቅ ሲል እኔ ለመጨመር ሞክራለሁ፣ መልሶ እንደገና ይጨምራል። ከፍ ዝቅ ሲል ነበርና ያው ምችለውን ጥረት አድርጌያለሁ። ለተፈጠረው የድምጽ ጥራት ይቅርታ ጠይቃለሁ። በዛሬው ዕለት በሀገራችን ወቅታዊ ጉዳይ ላይ የቀረበው ፕሮግራም ይህን ይመስል ነበር። ፕሮግራሙን ስለተከታተላችሁ እናመሰግናለን። ለወቅታዊ ሀገራችን መረጃዎች ፎሎ ማድረጋችሁን አትርሱ። መልካም ምሽት ይሁንላችሁ። ቀን ላይ ያላችሁ መልካም ቀን ይሁንላችሁ። አብዱራሂም አህመድ አብሬያችሁ ነበርኩ። ለተፈጠረው የድምጽ ችግር ይቅርታ እየጠየቅኩ ከአቅም በላይ ስለሆነ ነው። መልካም ጊዜ ይሁንላችሁ። አገራችንን ለሁሉም ዜጎች በእኩልነት በነጻነት የሚኖሩባት እንድትሆን የምን ጊዜም ምኞቴም ፍላጎቴም ነው። ወሰላሙ አለይኩም ወራህመቱላሂ ወበረካቱ።
Mohammed, I'm glad that you brought it up because actually several people on Twitter are discussing that very issue and want to know if that's going to change. 91, but it has not been tasted. None of the provisions that are included in the Constitution have been properly implemented so far. So it is a Constitution that tries to acknowledge that the country is a multi-ethnic country. It is not a country that's dominated by one language, one flag, one